Today we are looking at the game Stellar Blade by Shift Up and PlayStation. We'll review it and also talk about the accessibility in this episode. Let's go. Hello and welcome to this episode of Gaming Insight. My name is Steve Saylor. This is actually going to be a very different sort of format than I'm used to. So bear with me as I sort of figure out this whole way of doing reviews and content on my YouTube channel. Basically, for those who don't know, this is my podcast called Gaming Insight, where normally I would actually be able to talk to a guest about the news story that's happening on the week, the biggest news story, and kind of talking about the bigger context of what's happening in the gaming industry. That actually format is, I'm sort of sunsetting for the moment, open to potential, if there's big enough stories, I'm going to try to be able to have some guests on to be able to talk about it, but I found that this was a much better way to be able to still able to do the things that I want to be able to do, which is review games and talk about games from an accessibility standpoint, but in a format that is a little bit easier for me to be able to produce. I find that, unfortunately, the way I was doing reviews before, it was taking a lot of my time, and unfortunately, it just didn't really work out the way I wanted it to, and I was getting burnt out by that format. So I'm trying something new, basically where I talk to camera and I talk about my thoughts with all my notes about the game and that I'm playing, and also the accessibility that I found while playing the game. So expect more reviews coming up for me. Hopefully this will allow me to be able to produce more reviews at a more frequent pace than what I've been doing in the past. So I hope you'll be able to stick around for that. For those who are, who are getting through this intro and have no idea who the heck I am, I'm Steve Saylor. I am an accessibility consultant in the video game industry. I also am a content creator, Twitch ambassador, and I love video games, and I'm also blind. If you want to be able to find out how I can play games while blind, you can be able to check out the video here, or the link in the description down below, or a link in the podcast show notes, because this will also be available as a podcast. Speaking of which, you can be able to subscribe to this channel if you want to. I would really appreciate it. You can also be able to subscribe to the podcast by searching for either Steve Saylor or Gaming Insight on any podcast platform, and you can be able to find me there. So if you prefer me in audio, you can go there. If you prefer me on video, then hey, you're here. Welcome to my YouTube channel. So thank you so very much. All right, let's talk about Stellar Blade. I'm going to show some gameplay in a little bit, but I wanted to at least give my overall thoughts as I played it. The game and story are, they're interesting enough. Essentially, I kind of found that it kept me going, and it allowed me, it was interesting enough for me to be able to want to be able to play, because I don't normally play these types of games. I know this comes from a studio called Shift Up, which is their first game, and it is published by PlayStation, which, by the way, thank you to PlayStation for providing code for me to be able to play. It is exclusive to the PS5, and I would actually say, like, playing on the PS5, the game looks gorgeous. It is definitely a game that I think is well suited for the PS5. Would I like to be able to see it on other platforms? Sure. I am very much on the board of, I love, multi-platform releases for games, because then more people can be able to jump in and play their games. But, hey, PlayStation is offering these exclusives, and this is definitely one of them from Shift Up, which is a South Korean studio. And as a first outing for this game, I know they've been kind of in development, not necessarily hell, but development limbo for a while when trying to be able to create this game. I know this was under a different name before, at Project Eve, I believe, and then this became Stellar Blade. So I had sort of tangentially knew about the game itself, obviously with the recent announcement not too long ago about this game coming out. And now that we've got a chance to play it, it doesn't really, to me, stand out in like genre wise or in regards to story per se. Story is interesting enough to keep going. It basically centers on you are basically a super soldier as of sorts. I'm trying to be able to do this without spoilers. You are a super soldier as sorts called Eve, and you are part of this sort of basically the last remnants of humanity that had left Earth because of an attack from an alien race that had basically taken over the entire planet of Earth. And they come back to try to be able to take back Earth. And that's essentially kind of the crux of the story. And then Eve finds a companion called Adam, Hey, I don't get the reference either, but hey, it's Adam and Eve, so there we go. And basically, both of them are trying to be able to find ways, like they basically are like the only way, the way to be able to save humanity and be able to bring them back home, essentially, is to defeat this alien race that has now either enslaved the survivors that are left on Earth, or just take the planet back. But so that's the crux of the story, and that was probably the thing that kind of kept me going, because the combat, while interesting, it doesn't really do a heck of a lot different than in other games that I've seen. It does definitely rely on a lot of parries and dodges, but it is more forgiving and has, actually, for regards to accessibility, it has a lot of visual indicators as to help you when to dodge and also when to parry. It doesn't really have a lot of visual indicators for deaf and hard of hearing players, especially for any enemies that are attacking from off screen, but it is enough that you can be able to, it is a little bit more forgiving as well, because whenever you do die in the game, you are brought back to basically, there are plenty of save points throughout the entire, at least the section I have been able to play throughout the world, that it doesn't really take you further back, and you have to start things all over again, which is great. I will say that the combat is challenging. It is, especially on the kind of the basic difficulty that is or the default difficulty. There is a different difficulty that we'll talk about actually in a little bit, but it is especially when it comes to switching that difficulty, and they have a thing called action assist, but I will talk about that a little bit later on. And even when I was playing it with the normal difficulty, I found that I think that, over time, I probably wasn't able to figure it out. You can upgrade your combat skills, which gives you special moves to be able to take down your opponents a lot quicker and take out a lot of health, or break down different shields and stuff like that, which is great. And you're fighting the different types of creatures that are that have sort of taken over Earth, and they definitely have, each creature type has its own special attack and capability. I did find that it was a little bit harder for me to be able to get a grasp of sort of the special combat moves. There were times where I accidentally would hit the shoulder button instead of the left stick button to be able to, and then a face button in order to be able to do a special move. Because I don't know, my muscle memory with other games is usually the shoulder button plus a face button that usually kind of launches a new different special combat move, and the game wants you to be able to do that with some thumbsticks. And it's just the combat it took a little bit of practice to be able to get used to it. Even then, there was actually some moments where even simpler enemies were a little bit difficult for me to be able to play. And that's when I actually, pretty much after the first couple hours, I actually did switch to the story mode difficulty. And again, I'll talk about that in a minute. But you know what? I actually do have some gameplay that I want to be able to show you. I'm going to show you actually a little bit of the accessibility, or at least the accessibility menu. I do have, if you're listening to this, I do apologize, but there is actually if you go to the video, you can be able to watch this as well. But I'm basically showing off some of the accessibility menu, or at least the settings menu. There actually are a hint system that I will show an example of in a little bit. That actually does help quite a bit, especially when you're trying to figure out what you can be able to do. And I'm actually just going to skip in this video to the accessibility, because that's probably where a majority of the folks watching this are wondering what is actually available. You can also be able to have a center dot displayed on the screen, which is great. You can turn off motion blur, camera shake. You can do automatic camera rotation, so that way it will automatically move the camera to always behind Eve. There are subtitles. You can be able to display the speaker name. You can be able to increase the HUD size and background. There are colorblind settings that seems a little bit more of like a filter than necessarily a individual colors, but you can be able to adjust the intensity of that filter. You can be able to set the subtitle size to large, an opaque background, and also, I will actually get into this in a second, but they have a high contrast mode, which I was actually very surprised about. I'll talk about that in a minute. Let me just actually skip over to the first training mission that you do have as well. And I'll just start playing that. So don't worry, there's not really. Well, I'm skipping ahead of the story, but you can actually see the high contrast mode in action. You can build a set several different presets depending on the color blindness that you may have. But the option that I chose was basically where Eve is green, your allies are blue, and enemies are red, which is standard pretty much for a lot of high contrast. I do like the fact that it does allow you to be able to see a little bit more of the character models instead of just a straight shade or like a base like The Last of Us does. Last of Us has some detail, but with the high contrast in this, it actually adds a little, increases the contrast as it were, so you can still be able to see a lot of the nuances of the character model and also a lot of the facial expressions of the characters themselves. I did find that pretty much I was playing the entire game like this. I did try a little bit of what the game kind of looks like just in regular high contrast mode, and I found that I was missing areas where I needed to climb, but also enemies as well that were hiding in corners. And yes, there are enemies that hide in corners. They literally, you turn around, you enter a doorway, and all of a sudden there's an enemy literally right there that will attack you by surprise, and you kind of have to just deal with that. And unless you die by that, then you can get around a corner and you'll know that the enemy is there. But oftentimes I kind of was very slow to get through doors because I was like, is there an enemy there? I can't see him. I don't know. And they just kind of pop up out of nowhere. I did like that the larger HUD UI was pretty decent. I wish it was a little bit larger, or at least had a different, an extra large size instead of just the default, or not the default, but the larger HUD that I did choose. It does have a decent contrast with regards to the background, but I did find that some of the smaller elements of the UI was difficult to be able to see. The subtitles actually were pretty decent, even at the largest size. Unfortunately, there is no full captions, so if there are any enemy sounds or any other sound effects that are happening in the background, you won't be able to see them, unfortunately. And that actually kind of goes into what they also have, which is a lock-on system. By pushing R3, you can be able to lock on a specific target, and you can be able to shift your right thumbstick to be able to move between the different enemies. I did find that when you're in an area where there's a lot of different enemies, unfortunately, it doesn't really. It's not super great because there are definitely enemies that are attacking you from off camera that I found that I didn't see, or there was no indicator that the enemy was there. I can kind of hear it if I really paid attention to the audio cues of them, but sometimes they just kind of sneak up out of nowhere, and unfortunately I kind of wish that they were able to have a better visual indicator to let folks who are, especially for deaf or hard of hearing, be able to know that there's an enemy behind them, and actually it would have benefited me quite a bit. I would say definitely the highlights of the accessibility, especially just. I was even in this section, in the tutorial section, I was pleasantly surprised by what was available to players, and actually it really did. Kind of that's what kind of kept me going, because it was this is the thing that I love about accessibility, is that if you add accessibility into the game, you're going to keep me interested a lot longer than I would normally, because again, I don't play these games at all, so I'm not really super interested in these kind of stories, or this kind of action combat type games in this particular setting. But you put it in accessibility, I'm interested, and it actually kept me going probably a lot longer than I would have thought if the game didn't have any accessibility. I'm actually going to skip ahead to I believe that there is. I love this sort of hint system that they have for a kind of a cool accessibility highlight, in that they have there are definitely security codes that you have to enter in order to be able to unlock certain areas. And when you do find, when you go up to a security code that you don't have the code for, it just comes up as blank. But if you do find it, what I actually have showing here is you then see a bunch of different symbols you can be able to select. But if you hit the triangle button, it actually will do kind of an overlay on the keypad of what the actual code is, so you don't have to go into your inventory to be able to read the code and memorize the code. It's just available right there and then. And yes, it does disappear a little bit more quicker than I would have liked, but especially because the symbols are symbols I don't recognize or remember, so I'm having to constantly be able to bring up that code to be able to see. But once you have it and you just hit triangle, you can like it's available right there, and you don't have to go into any other separate menus. I find that that's actually really great for cognitive accessibility and just accessibility in general. I love seeing that. All right, I'm going to skip ahead actually to a boss battle that I wanted to show here. This is kind of a boss battle that actually happens a little bit early on. It's actually the first big huge boss that you fight, and I definitely died quite a bit in this, but what I did want to be able to showcase is like when you do die, you actually at least with the bosses, you are relatively close to the boss itself, and there are these areas called camps, and also kind of like special kind of like outposts that are set up by essentially like the scouts within the last bit of humanity that comes back, and they are pretty plenty throughout the world, and I think they're good for obviously for checkpoints throughout the whole game. But the good thing is, at least for a boss battle, is that they are pretty close, so that if you do die, you can be able to just jump right back in without having to sort of have to go through an entire section again. Especially with a lot of Souls games where they do that, where you have to basically fight all the enemies that you defeated before just to be able to get to the boss. I'm actually going to showcase how I did beat the boss in this. Let me just skip ahead to this. This was actually pretty cool because you can see actually on the video that there are pretty good visual indicators as to when to be able to not only hit the perfect parries but dodges as well, and I was able to, without it actually turning on the action assist, was able to at least learn the animations pretty well, and actually after a couple of tries, I'd probably say about maybe 6 or 7 tries, I was able to learn the patterns of the boss and be able to know when to be able to hit. So I did find that at least the combat, even though it does rely on perfect parries and dodges in order to be able to do special moves, I did find the timing of those actually were a little bit more forgiving than in other games. Now I'm also showing the skills menu in here. I will say probably that the skills menu, I didn't see anything that would have been better or actually labeled as an accessibility option that was locked by skill progression, so I didn't have to worry about that. But one thing I did want to show is anytime you learn a new skill or you want to go and relearn a skill or refresh your memory on a skill, they do have a training mode for each individual skill, and it kind of gives you a sort of a hint system, and also it helps you learn the timing of how to be able to use that skill properly. And I'm actually showing this here in the video of a skill called Blink, where basically if you when they're about to be able to do a swing and you want to be able, and they have it's basically an undodgeable basically you can't do a perfect parry for, then your sword, basically you'll see an indicator that they're about to, the enemy is about to hit you, then your sword lights up in a sort of like a blue light, and then that gives you the indication if you hold left stick up and circle, you can be able to jump, blink in behind them and the enemy and deal some pretty heavy damage. And I found that what I loved about the training was that it allows you to be able to learn the animation and the timing of when to be able to do that. It also actually showcased some pretty good audio cues that I feel that blind players actually would be able to benefit from this. I will say that this game is definitely not accessible for all blind players, especially for those who are sightless. There is no navigational assistant in the game. The areas are pretty contained, and you're not, it's not as super open world as other games in the genre. This is actually, as far as what I would say, there was actually no map to speak of, so you are playing the game in sections, so you can be able to navigate around, but I think it'll be much easier, more comfortable to be able to play that with sighted assistance, to be able to know where to go. But I did find that the audio cues were if you were able to memorize them pretty well, especially in the training mode, you can then be able to learn how each enemy attacks, and then you can be able to learn the audio cues along with that. So it's not meant to be as in a blind accessibility, but it is part of the design, which is really great for basically for blind players. Without whether it's intentional or unintentional, it's just really good design in general. Okay, so next video I have here the thing I definitely want to be able to talk about is the changing of the difficulty. So I have a video that was like I was having trouble trying to be able to beat a certain section. There was like a sort of a parking garage that had a lot of different enemies, and I kept dying a lot, even though you do have at least 3 default like health packs to be able to kind of help you that you can be able to use. But I decided to, after several tries of doing this, I'm going to lower the difficulty. Good thing is you can be able to change the difficulty at any given time throughout throughout the game. It's just in the settings menu. It does warn you that that you have to if you change the difficulty, you basically have to you have to restart a little bit from a section. But so you can't just sort of like change the difficulty when you're in the middle of a combat fight and restart. You basically have to restart from where you last left off. But it does allow you to be able to turn on an option called Action Assist, which I mentioned earlier. And Action Assist is kind of a way that works is that it extends the timing of perfect parries and perfect dodges, and basically, or just parries and dodges in general. So it allows you to be able to know. It gives you a little bit of a better time to learn the animation, but then also be able to do those moves quite well. And I'm actually going to show a little bit of it. I'm trying to be able to see, like, it still is challenging, I will say that, and you can kind of see that it does, it sort of gives a little bit of visual indicators to which button to be able to press and a little bit of a timing, and you can see that the game does slow down quite a bit. But when you do have Action Assist turned on, it allows you to be able to do special combos that only are available if you are able to do a series of perfect parries, and I'm actually going to show that here. This is pretty much one of the brute enemies that I have, but you can be able to see that there is a timer that pops up on screen and tells you which button to be able to push, kind of like a quick time sequence, but it still like allows you to be able to I'm going to actually play that again so you can be able to see. It's kind of a cool, it allows you to be able to do cool finishing moves that I found that I would not be able to do if I didn't have the Action Assist turned on. And once I had that on, I was like, that's it, that's how I'm going to play the rest of the game, because it was still challenging enough, because you still have to do the moves, but it gives you just enough to kind of help you a little bit if you just want to be able to get through the story or the action in and of itself. Also, in regards to one cool highlight I want to mention too is that there is a hint system that if you can't figure out where to go next, there is a little tiny icon that pops up on the top right of the screen that basically says hint, and if you hit the left on the D-pad, it'll pop up with a little tiny hint being like, hey, you need to make sure that you get like a certain thing in order to be able to unlock an area. And you can sort of set the timing of that within the settings, whether you want it to be short or long, of how long of it appears on screen. Also, Adam, technically also, who is your little sort of drone that kind of is with you. He basically is controlled by a human called Adam and is in his ship, and the drone is kind of like your companion throughout the whole adventure. And he kind of actually also helps you in figuring out where to go next. I have heard from some folks that he can be a little bit annoying in that sense of, how in Horizon or Forbidden West, where you basically are just Aloy is just talking too much and telling you what to do, or giving you hints as far as what to do next pretty quickly. And I know that how annoying that can be. It is technically an accessibility option that I do like, but I could see how annoying that can be to players that just don't need it. And Adam kind of serves as that a little bit. I didn't find him as annoying as some of my friends who have played it, who I know are doing it for review. Anyway, that's basically all it is. And you can see, like, actually I'm doing a boss battle here. You can see Blink definitely helped out a lot in this boss battle, and I was actually kind of pretty proud of this one. This one was the first boss battle I actually did without dying at all, and yet there was definitely some challenging moments in this that was harder for me to be able to, obviously to be able to dodge properly, but as you can see, I was able to do it in one go. Yay, Steve. And also, yay, Eve, as well. Okay, so that is pretty much it for this review, as it were. I'm going to keep these relatively short to a certain degree. But I will say that overall, it actually, it is surprisingly accessible. More than I actually thought it would. It actually seems that more Eastern games are becoming more and more accessible, and I'm actually really, really appreciative of that. It's not fully there yet, but as someone who, doesn't play this type of genre, it is good to see that progress is being made, and hopefully we'll see more studios in Japan and in South Korea and other countries in that region, making video games that are accessibility is something that can benefit all players, not, just disabled ones. I will definitely try to keep playing this a little bit more myself, but we'll see how far I get a little bit later, further on. But as overall, I give Stellar Blade for accessibility a 3.5 out of 5. Anyway, thank you so very much for listening / watching this episode. I'm trying to be able to, again, do this new format. I hope it works. Let me know what your thoughts are. Are there things that you want me to be able to do, focus in on more, or any sections that you feel like I'm kind of missing out? I know I don't really go into the specific details, like, hey, this is for blind accessibility, this is for deaf and hard hearing accessibility, for motor disability. Unfortunately, I couldn't be able to, I'm still figuring this out. So if there are things that you have any questions, please feel free to leave it in the comments below, or reach out to me on social media. Thanks again. I want to encourage you to also, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to be able to hit the subscribe button, both on this podcast as well as on YouTube, I really greatly appreciate it, especially because I want to be able to do more reviews as I do more of the podcast sort of style of reviews. And hey, I'm liking this so far. I think that this episode was a success. And hopefully you do too. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. As always, I remain obediently yours. Bye-bye.